Hey friends, welcome back. If you have been around for a while, you know I don't do a lot of recap content. I'm usually more interested in what's next than what just happened. But this one felt different. The Sustainable CEO Summit wrapped up and I've been sitting with it. And there's a few things I want to share with you today because I think they apply whether you're in the room or not. So grab something to drink, get comfortable because we're going a little deeper today. Because I think context matter here, especially if you were not there, let me tell you a little bit more about the summit. The Sustainable CEO Summit was a free 3-day online event built around one central idea that the way most founders are growing their business is quietly costing them more than they realize. Not an obvious dramatic way, in the slow accumulating way where one day you look up and realize you've built something impressive, they're also completely trapped inside. I brought together 27 experts, real operators and coaches and strategists to talk about three things: protecting your CEO energy, building the business that actually holds growth, and learning to lead as a supported CEO rather than a solo act holding everything together with sheer will. That was the container. And what happened inside, it confirmed a lot of what I already believed in and surprised me in a few ways I didn't expect. So let me take you through both. The things that nobody talked about when you're building something like this. I'll be honest with you, going into this summit, I had a very clear vision of what I wanted to look like. Not noisy, not a content dump, not people saying the same versions of the same thing. I wanted to feel like a real conversation between serious founders, the kind of conversation that actually moves something. And here's what I didn't anticipate. Building it the way I wanted to build required me to practice everything that I teach, every single thing. I had to make decisions without everyone's input. I had to hold standards without doing it all myself. I had to trust people I hadn't worked together with at this capacity before. I had to let things be imperfect in the middle, knowing they will come together at the end. And there were moments, honestly, where I wanted to take it all back and just handle it myself. And if you ever delegated something and felt that urge, that exact moment where you feel that tightness in your chest and you think, it would just be faster if I did it, that moment is the whole thing. That is the pattern we are here to break. So, the first lesson, and maybe the most personal one, is this: the work you teach will show up in your own business. It always does. And you don't get a pass just because you know the framework. Knowing the framework doesn't protect you from the identity, it just gives you a name for what's happening so you can catch it faster. I caught it faster. I still had to work through it. And honestly, I'm glad I did because it reminded me what actually feels like to be in that moment. And it made every conversation we had across the 3 days feel more grounded to me, not rhetorical, but real. So, what building the summit taught me about standards? Let's dive into that. Here's something that came up for me personally that I think is worth naming it out loud. I have high standards, and you probably do too, or you wouldn't be listening to this. And one of the sneakiest ways high standards can work against you is when they live in your head. When your standards aren't documented or not communicated or not transferable, the only way to guarantee them is to stay personally involved in everything, which means every time you try to step back, something feels off. And if you interpret that as an evidence, then you can't handle things off. But what is actually happening is that your team doesn't have access to what is inside of your head. They're not failing you. They're working without a map. Building the summit forced me to externalize my standards in a way that I hadn't fully done before. And what does a good speaker intro sound like? What does a well-run session feels like? What does the attendee experience need to deliver? I had to answer those questions clearly enough so that other people could hold them without me being in the room. And that result wasn't lower quality. It was actually higher quality because multiple people were aligned around the same clear target instead of guessing at mine. That's the move most founders haven't made yet. Not delegating tasks, delegating clarity, making excellence transferable so it can happen without your hands on everything. Next, let's talk about what the summit confirmed about the founders we were talking to. One of the things that stood out most across every session, across every speaker, across every conversation we had was how consistent the pattern is. The founders in the room were not struggling because they weren't smart. They were not struggling because they didn't work hard. They were struggling because they built something real and then they never resigned the role that matched what they built. They were still operating like a person who started the business, not the person who needs to lead it now. That gap between the founder who built and the CEO who needs to lead, that's what the summit was really about at its core. And if you're listening to this and thinking, that sounds familiar, it should. Because most of us don't get a formal handoff. Nobody sits us down and say, okay, congratulations, you've graduated from scrappy operator to strategic CEO. Please update your identity accordingly. It just happens quietly. And suddenly you're doing all the things you've always did, but your business is bigger now. The stakes are higher and the costs of staying in that pattern are steeper than they used to be. The exhaustion isn't from working hard, it's from working hard at the wrong level. That's the thing I want you to really sit with, because a lot of founders interpret the tiredness and the exhaustion and the burnout as a sign that they need to work less. And sometimes, yes, but more often they need to work differently. They need to stop doing the things that should belong to their team, to their systems, to their structure, and start doing the things that only a CEO can do. The capacity doesn't come from doing less. It comes from doing the right thing. I'm going to say that again. Capacity doesn't come from doing less. It comes from doing the right thing. The three things I kept hearing underneath every conversation across the 3 days. We talked about protecting CEO energy, building the business to hold growth, and leading as a supportive CEO. And underneath all of it, three things that kept surfacing across every session, every speaker, and every conversation in the chat was, number one, the most founders are carrying more than they need to be. Not because they have bad teams or bad systems, and not because they haven't tried delegation before. A lot of people have, because they haven't fully decided to put things down. There's still a part of them that believes that if they just stay close enough to everything, nothing will fall apart. And that belief costs them more than any MIST system ever would. The caring isn't just logistical, it's emotional. We don't realize that. It's the mental tab that is always open in the background, running through the to-do list, checking whether things are on track, noticing what hasn't been done yet. That tab doesn't close just because you hired someone. It closes when you make a real decision to let someone else own an outcome, not just execute a task. The second thing was that the support structure comes before the freedom. This one I want to say slowly because it runs counter to how a lot of founders think about scaling. Most people think that when things slow down, I'll build a better system. When I have more margins, I'll get more support. More money, I can hire. When I'm less busy, I'll figure out the structure. But that is backwards. The support is what creates the margins. The structure is what creates the slowdown. You don't get breathing room and then build a container. You build a container and then get the breathing room to show up. Every founder who has ever made a real leap in their capacity did it by investing in structure before they felt ready, not after. The readiness comes from building the thing, not from waiting until conditions are perfect. And I know that it can feel risky. It can feel like you're spending energy you don't have on something that might not work. But the alternative is staying exactly where you are, doing exactly what you're doing, getting exactly the results you're already getting. And most of the founders that are in the room had already decided that wasn't acceptable anymore. The third one was that leading as a supported CEO is a decision, not a destination. It is not something you arrived at after you figured everything out. It is not a level you unlock after you completed enough tasks or hit enough revenue milestones. It's something you choose repeatedly in the middle of the mess. You choose to let someone else hold that task when you are not sure they will do it right. You choose to trust the process that you built even when you're tempted to abandon or just take over. You choose to stay in a CEO seat even when the operator seat is screaming at you to sit back down. It's a daily practice. It's a habit. The people who are doing it well are not the ones who stop feeling the pull. I still feel it every day. I felt it a lot during the summit, and I teach on this. They're the ones who got better at not answering it. And the part that surprised me the most, I expected the tactical sessions to really land. The system conversions, the delegation frameworks, the operational deep dives. And they did. What I didn't expect is how much the identity conversations would move people. The sessions about who you were being as a leader, not just what you're doing, Those are the ones that created the most visible shift, because most founders can tell you exactly what they need to change. They know they need to delegate more. They know they need better systems. They know they need to stop being the bottleneck. They know. The knowing isn't the problem. The problem is that there's an identity underneath the pattern that hasn't been updated yet. The part of them that still believes that their value comes from being the one who holds everything together. The part that learned a long time ago in business, or maybe even before, that the safest option is for you to handle it. That part does not respond to information. It doesn't care how good your systems are. It will find a reason to take things back every single time, because taking things back is how you learned to stay safe. And until that part gets addressed, the tactics don't stick. You can build the best delegation framework in the world and still end up redoing your team's work at 11 p.m. That's the work that makes this different from our productivity conversation. It's not about doing better. It's about doing things differently. It's about being different. And being different requires looking at who you were training yourself to be and deciding whether that identity is still serving your business that you're trying to build or not. So let's talk about the Audacity Bridge Scholarship. One piece of the summit I want to highlight specifically is the Audacity Bridge Scholarship. We designed the scholarship to fund a female founder who is ready to implement, not just ready to consume inspiration. Someone who is already doing the real work, already delivering real results, but carrying gaps between what she knows she's capable of and how she's actually operating. We called it an Audacity Bridge because that's exactly what it is. A bridge between where she is and where she knows she should be. Not a rescue, not charity. It's a bridge for someone who is really ready to cross it. The criteria we use to select the recipient isn't about who had the hardest story or the biggest need. It was about readiness, specificity, the willingness to make the CEO level moves in the next 30 days, not someday. And I wanted to say this clearly. The scholarship is funded in part by the sponsors of the summit, which means the brands that chose to show up for this event didn't just buy a logo placement. They helped put a real resource in the hands of real founders. And that's the kind of alignment I want to build everything around. What I want you to take from this, even if you were not there, is here's the thing about summits, about any event really. The value is in the content. The content is almost always available somewhere else if you look for it. The value is in the decision you make because of what you heard. So I want to give you something concrete to take away from today's episode, even if you were not there live. There were 3 questions I want you to sit with. The first one is, where in your business are you still the operator when you should be the CEO? Not in theory, specifically. What tasks, what decisions, what area of your business are you still running because some part of you isn't fully decided to let it go? The second one is, what standards do you have that live in your head? What does excellent look like in your business that you've never actually written down or communicated clearly or made it transferable? Because if your standards are not transferable, your time will never be free. The third one is, what would you build or do or become if your capacity wasn't the ceiling? If your business had the structure you need to hold growth without holding your breath, what would you do with that space? Because the answer to that question is the real reason to do this work. Not to be less busy, not to have more time. Is to have more capacity for the things that actually matter to you, the things only you can do, the things that move your business forward in ways that no system or team member ever could. That is the CEO seat and is waiting for you. If today's episode resonates, share it with a founder who needs to hear it. And if you're ready to stop being the bottleneck in your own business, come find me at accidentalceo.co. There's always a next step there waiting for you. I'll see you next week.